Welcome to Belling History with the Good Time Girls, a hyper-local podcast about the quirky history of Bellingham, Washington, and the fourth corner of the United States. Even though we like to keep things close to home, these stories are no less entertaining to the masses and those who find themselves, unfortunately, outside of the PNW. We are your hosts. I am Colby.
And I'm Ren, and we are known here in Bellingham as the Good Time Girls for our tour business, serving up hot Belling history since 2011. Today's episode is called Taxidermy Tales, or Stuffed Bellinghaminals, which is a lot. I have no follow-up for that. Before we get into our local tales, though, let's talk about some of the basics. Some taxidermy facts. Are you guys ready to get into it, Colby?
Yeah.
Okay. So a little background.
Literally into it.
Into it. Okay. So what is taxidermy? The art of preserving an animal's body by mounting over an armature or stuffing for the purpose of display or study. Derived from ancient Greek taxis, order or arrangement, and derma, skin, thus arrangement of skin or skin art. I love
etymology.
It. I love etymology so much, but that is, well.
What do you do for a living? I arrange skin.
I arrange the skin of dead animals. So taxidermy is primarily performed on vertebrates, mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, amphibians, things that have a backbone. But they can also be done on larger insects or arachnids. Taxidermy animals are mainly used for museum displays as hunting trophies or as art or decor, and even to memorialize a pet. And not
a fan.
No, actually, I would consider it.
You would consider it?
I would consider
it.
You
might reconsider after this.
Okay. Okay, good. Thanks for the warning.
Although things could have improved. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, noted. Okay, so some of the terms that might pop up, we've got specimen, which equals replica of an animal as appeared in real life. Trophy equals hunting memento, obviously, or mount can refer to either of those. The mount. Taxidermy does not require killing an animal that could have otherwise remained alive. So all you PETA folks out there.
It often does.
They may be hunted
but doesn't
for the
require
specimen.
it. Yeah.
Like when my doggy dies and then I go and get him taxidermied and put him next to my bed.
Yeah, there are taxidermists who only will taxidermy like non-hunted animals.
Oh, very cool. Mm-hmm. Of course there are. So let's see. People who do taxidermy are called taxidermists. They can be professional or amateur, obvious. Fun. If you want to do taxidermy, it really helps to be familiar with anatomy, sculpture, painting, and tanning. So it's kind of it's a complex art.
It is.
For sure.
And in getting into history, if you go way back, technically Egyptians were the first to preserve animals, but it wasn't really taxidermy. It was more mummification.
Right. Okay.
So they're putting all the animals in the tombs, by preserving them with injections, spices, oils, all those good things. They mummified a lot of things like dogs, cats, monkeys, birds. Even a hippopotamus.
No way.
Yeah.
That would take a lot of oils and spices.
Right. But they were just trying to send off things with their loved ones to the afterlife.
Right.
So it really didn't have anything to do with like art or anatomy or they didn't have to look good.
Right.
So there is one very early mount in a cathedral in Italy. It's a crocodile hanging from the ceiling. That's a cool church
awesome.
Decor.
Yeah.
So a document from 1534 reportedly references it. So it's at least that old.
Whoa!
Isn't that crazy?
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
So tanning, which is like curing the hides and skins of animals so they're soft and won't decay, that's been going on for a very, very, very long time. And taxidermy seems to kind of have evolved out of that, or like as a logical sort of side gig that could go along with it. Tanneries, furriers,
I like
all
the term furrier.
Yes, I'm a furrier.
It's not the same as furry.
No.
For all you Gen Z.
Yeah. So you'd just be taking that tanned hide and then like being like, let's stuff it. Let's like wrap it around something and make a little stuffed animal.
Okay, yeah.
So by the 1700s, you see publications for methods of preserving animals for natural history cabinets.
Ooh, I love that.
Right? So we get to the golden age of taxidermy, which is, of course, the Victorian era.
Oh, yeah.
And it's during this period that it becomes a popular part of interior design and decor. Also, taxidermy was used for education to, examine these animals or look at these animals that you wouldn't see otherwise. Also, exploring and colonizing the world and bringing back, exotic things and wanting to show them off. So we got the father of modern taxidermy is an English ornithologist called John Hancock.
Okay, John. Cool name.
I know, but Hancock collected birds. He had these displays, and other people essentially started copying him, and little collections started springing up everywhere, both professional and more amateur. And I don't know why, but birds seem to be a big favorite thing, especially during the Victorian era. Queen Victoria had a big stuffed bird collection.
Oh, I did not realize that. Yeah. Well, birds are cool and they're elusive. They're hard to see up close.
And they were even on the Victorian Edwardian hats and stuff. Yeah. Another popular thing was anthropomorphic taxidermy at this time.
Oh, no.
So this is
no.
Yeah, you've seen these probably in some pictures, photos, where they would taxidermy little animals like bunnies and kittens and then dress them and pose them in human-like activities. So Walter Potter was one guy who did that and made these little dioramas like Kitten's Tea Party.
That's right, but they were real dead taxidermy.
Yeah, so that guy and another guy, Edward Hart. He did squirrels boxing. Anyway. So then we start getting more 20th century or realism science, stuff like that.
Okay, right.
And in the U.S., we had a pioneering taxidermist named Carl Ethan Akeley.
Okay.
Not to be confused with Carl Akers, local taxidermist who we're going to talk about later.
Yeah.
But Akeley was a sculptor, biologist, conservationist, and nature photographer. And he developed what became known as the Akeley method of taxidermy. And so he really contributed heavily. A lot of his mounts would be found in museums. And it also, taxidermy kind of became thought of or classified as an American folk craft.
Oh.
I think this just became something people did for fun.
Cool. Yep.
There was actually a taxidermy Boy Scout badge.
Yes!
From 1911 to 1954.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Over 10,000 Boy Scouts earned that badge. Before they eventually dropped it because people just weren't as interested anymore.
Right. Well, they stuffed every goddamn thing there was to be stuffed. 10,000 Boy Scouts. I want to see some of that taxidermy. It has to be...
It has to be derpy as hell.
The derpiest. Your mom keeps it, you know what I mean? Keeps it in a box.
Have you seen the coffee table book? I think it's called just Bad Taxidermy.
Bad Taxidermy. I love that.
It's great. Yeah. It's really good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I guess on that note, let's discuss the methodology. How does one taxidermy an animal? We're not going to go into too crazy in detail, thank God. So this is just the basic gist. If you want to learn how to taxidermy for real, don't ask us, but just so we have an idea of what we're talking about here, we'll give you a little... Okay, different things to consider, but it's best if the animal is fresh or preserved in some way after it dies. I mean, I feel like that's common sense, but
taxidermy road.
You could try, I guess, if it's not too damaged.
Yes.
But a more decayed animal can be harder and grosser to successfully mount. Note that you can freeze whole animals for later taxidermying. So when Cecil dies, I will put him in the freezer. Okay, I'm learning. So ideally, you would want to have a form of some sort prepared first. So the form is a base to put the skin on. So you would take measurements of the animal and such. Oh my God, while Cecil's alive, let's measure him for his form.
When they're dead, before you put him in the freezer.
I know, but you know what? I like to be proactive. Let's get on it.
Okay.
So anyway, you just try and recreate the exact size and shape of the animal body if possible, and then have that ready. Early taxidermists might have skipped the form and just stuffed the animal with sawdust or straw or rags. Literally a stuffed animal.
Yeah, like a lumpy teddy bear.
Okay, love it. There have been lots of methods and materials used over time. Sometimes forms were molded from clay, which could be heavy. Forms could be made out of wood, wool, plaster. Wire wrapped in cotton became a long-time standard. You can create a mold of the animal carcass, but you could pretty much use your imagination here historically, whatever was handy. I'm trying to imagine what might have been handy. Corn cobs.
Yeah, what do you find if you open up some old taxidermy?
Yeah. Modern taxidermists can purchase foam forms and mannequins that can be manipulated into different positions. That, to me, is lazy. That's not trying. That is lazy.
It also doesn't seem like you would probably still have to modify it quite a bit because animals vary, in size.
Yeah, you would.
You're not
think.
all going to fit the same.
No, but it's something to start with,
Yeah.
and I don't approve. Okay, so then you get your form there, and then you skin the animal, just as if you were going to butcher it or cook it. Okay, maybe I don't want a taxidermy of Cecil. I'm changing my mind now. I see what you're saying. Historically, though, if a taxidermist got a whole animal, they would likely also butcher, right? And get the meat. They would likely possess all of those skills. So anyway, so for things like hunting trophies, that's obvious. People might just deliver the head and skin to the taxidermist and keep the meat for themselves. There are lots of guides for hunters on how to prepare an animal you've killed for taxidermy. Skins prepared for taxidermy still have the little... Oh, Jesus Christ. Still have the little... I love that you put little... Skins prepared for taxidermy still have the little paws and head attached, unlike furs for other uses. Oh my god. Anyway, theoretically, to do...
This is why I was like, did you have a chance to read this?
I think this is a good little, peek behind the curtain. Because Colby does a lot of our research. She does all of this. And then we kind of go through it together. And this time there's so much information. And we're kind of on the fly. And I think it's really fun that I am reading this to you. And I've never seen it before. I'm just becoming increasingly horrified.
Sorry.
No, I kind of love it. I think this is a really good shtick we have going. Okay, so... Anyway, theoretically, to do taxidermy, there's no need to see blood and guts. You don't have to cut into the body cavity necessarily, but obviously you wouldn't want to waste anything potentially useful. Likely, butchers and taxidermists had deals worked out. Bones are a whole nother thing. Skulls are often used in taxidermy, but not so much the rest, because that's where the form comes in. Some also do skeletal articulation, that again, probably a whole nother part of it, right? So if there were undesired parts... Colby looked online and found that what they're supposed to do currently, modern times, is send it to the rendering plant. But apparently, often what happens in real life is a black hefty bag and the nearest trash bin, right? Or, it's a good compost.
Not smelling so good.
So after the skin is removed, it would have to be tanned or treated. Essentially, this is treating it with substances so it won't rot or attract bugs. There are different methods. There's wet versus dry, etc. We're not going to get into the details. Thank you, Colby. But historically, this often involved chemicals like arsenic was used as an insect repellent, later replaced by borax, thank goodness. The bearskin rug. Laced with arsenic. So once the skin is all prepared, it's attached to the form, basically stretched over and sewn on. Then there are finishing touches like glass eyes, and nowadays there are artificial teeth and beaks and such. Again, lazy. Okay, so that kind of, there you go. Now me and the rest of our audience have 101 here.
All right, now you know. It's a while. I've never had a reason to go on taxidermy supply websites before now. So that was very educational.
Was it so cool, yeah.
Also a lot of forums. There's a lot of just taxidermy people talking taxidermy.
This feels
very entertaining. And it gets real wild when the new hipster taxidermists get in the mix and are looking for advice, and then the old school Jimmy Joe Bob taxidermy guys. It's interesting.
Oh, all right. Well, I know what I'm doing later.
Anyway, okay, let's talk about taxidermy here in Bellingham.
Do tell.
So, one of the earliest known people in this area to have some dedicated taxidermy skills was a man named John Y. Collins. He's always written as John Y. Collins or J. Y. Collins. I could not for the life of me find what the Y
That's
stands
a weird...
for. I know.
Yeah.
So, stands for Joseph.
Yeah.
I don't know. John Y. Collins.
John Joseph Collins.
What is a name that starts with a Y?
I know. Yoder.
Yoda.
Yoda. That's it. That must be it.
John was born in 1834 in Illinois. John served in the Civil War, and afterwards they relocated to Kansas. And some of you might have heard of the so-called Kansas colony or also known as the Washington Colony, depending on whether you were a Kansan or a Washingtonian.
Oh, interesting.
But there was a whole colony of folks in the 1880s that came to this area from Kansas. And the gist was that after the Seaholm coal mine had closed down, there wasn't much of an economy here. So the remaining few non-indigenous people with donation land claims decided to offer up some parcels of land to entice this colony of folks to come out here and rebuild the old mill on Whatcom Creek. And so John Collins was one of these people. In fact, he was the treasurer of the colony. So he arrives in 1882, and after the colonists got the mill built up and running, he purchased the very first shingle manufactured at that mill, and he kept it for his collections.
Oh, I love that.
He becomes like the local collector of curios.
Yes. Okay. He might be a little quirky.
He is very quirky sounding. Mm-hmm. And eventually, with his collections, he starts what is called the first museum locally.
Yeah, right on.
But I think we need to sort of discuss in a quick aside here about this like curio collections and museums, because when I was an anthropology student, that was actually a really interesting class that I took, was museology, and it's like the study of museums and the history of that, and looking critically at like, you know, a lot of inherent colonialism and all of the how museums sort of evolved over time, because it really started out with stuff like this, like just random people collecting stuff as they traveled around.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they were the collections, wealthy people. So we had royal cabinets with like exotic and precious gifts from foreign ambassadors or goods seized during colonization of foreign lands. So all of these collections would be amassed. And then also on smaller scales, this would happen just with weirdos like John Collins.
Right. Yeah, just all those. Yeah. Yeah.
So you'd say like a curiosity cabinet or a curio cabinet.
Oh, I never put together that curio is curiosity.
That's what this is. That's what we're talking about.
Oh, so it's just a fancy little...
anything. It's just a collection of like your weird
shit.
Your like souvenirs of random stuff you've collected.
Your stuffed dog.
It's a real hodgepodge.
Yeah,
so
that's cool.
Many of these collections become the foundations of museums. And, you know, museums then evolved to have an entire building and staff to care for these collections and become increasingly specialized. Like then you get museums of art, museums of history, museums of natural history, lots of taxidermy there. But a lot of museums today are reckoning with those sort of legacies of what to do with all this weird hodgepodge of stuff that they may still have a lot of that was like the nucleus of the original collection. And some of it might be controversial. There might be human remains. You know, you might have cultural artifacts that need to be repatriated. Right. It's a whole thing. Anyway, just keep that in mind, because John Collins' collections were said to contain such things as rare specimens of fossils, birds, and skeletons, but also indigenous artifacts and even human remains are mentioned in his collections.
Oh, wow.
So also a lot of taxidermied critters that he would taxidermy himself. In the newspaper, loved to talk about him and his collections and what new items he was acquiring.
What can we talk about now?
Yeah. Seriously, they were bored.
Okay. There are many newspaper reports of the various things John Collins has added to his collections. This included rocks and crystals, quote, a pair of live Texas horned toads, cool, a bald eagle, which had been left on his desk, stalagmites from a cave in British Columbia, a skeleton of, quote, queer species of shark 10 feet long. In September of 1888, this description of Collins' collections appeared in the Daily Intelligencer. J.Y. Collins, a taxidermist of Whatcom, has quite a collection of albinos, among them deer, fisher, loon, all white with pink eyes. He has some semi-albinos, which are white with splotches of fawn, and he has among his collection the flying squirrel of Washington Territory. He occasionally gets to see a parrot, which was found on Lawson's Reef on Mantua Island.
It's called a sea parrot, and I tried to figure it out from the description, but I don't know.
They're common, I guess, on San Juan Archipelago and also on Susha Island.
I mean, this was written in 1888, so I
they're
have
probably
a feeling
gone.
They're not there anymore.
They're all taxidermied somewhere, somebody's attic. The bird has a beak 2.5 inches long, 2 inches wide, and a spoon-shaped like bill of a duck. The head is white and surmounted by a long white crest. The neck is white, the beak red, and the body brown. The tail, feet, and wings are like those of a duck. It feeds on shellfish and candlefish fish and is very wild and difficult to trap or shoot.
Right, so that's pretty descriptive. I was like
No,
looking at
that's
birds and I
crazy.
couldn't figure out what it is.
That's so fascinating, and it was local.
So he had an albatross, which is a very large seabird.
Yeah.
Right? And note that term has also come to have kind of a metaphorical meaning, like a burden or a curse.
Yep.
And the origin of that is because sailors considered an albatross to be lucky, supposedly, and the epic poem by Coleridge, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Did you have to read that in high school, perchance?
I do remember it. Yep.
I had to read it. And my high school English teacher actually was cool and brought in a boombox and played us the Iron Maiden
fuck
song,
yeah.
which is like
God.
a 15-minute long, inspired by the Rime of the Ancient Mariner.
And you remember it to this day,
it
so
kills. I'm going to link that in our show notes.
Yeah, thank God for teachers, and thank God for Iron Maiden.
I did go back and give that a listen because I got completely distracted by this albatross and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner and was like, Iron Maiden.
That's awesome.
But so in that epic story, a sailor shoots a friendly albatross and is forced to wear the carcass around his neck as punishment.
Yes.
So that's where that metaphor.
That's right, yeah.
So anyhow, this was a taxidermied albatross. And J.M. Edson, who we'll talk about him later, but he recalled the story as printed in the Herald in 1941. And he's referencing that poem by Coleridge here when he quotes, "Stout they averred he'd killed the bird that made the breeze to blow." And then it says, "But that old tradition didn't seem to worry Albert Kittles of Marietta as he told the story of one of his youthful adventures at the Whatcom Museum Wednesday. To get a look at a living albatross ordinarily involves a voyage far out to sea. Only professional sailors and rovers are supposed to know about them. However, this deity of the ancient mariner once came inland to Rosario Strait and close to Bellingham Bay. To be exact, an albatross arrived at a position just off the south end of Sinclair Island on March 17th, 1888. So that's just south of Lummi Island. Young Kittles had just become the happy possessor of a .44 Winchester, which in those days was the ne plus ultra, meaning the ultimate, of all shooting irons. He had it with him when he spotted this large, strange fowl far out on the water. Some target.
Jesus.
At his fourth shot, the bird collapsed. He knew what to do with it. Hanging around his neck. No, he took it to John Collins, who, when John Collins laid eyes on it, he promptly extracted $5 from his pocket and handed it to Albert in exchange for the prize.
Okay.
Which was a lot of money back then. So, and then the writer, who is Edson. So Edson says, he goes on to say, well, it was in August of 1888 that the writer discovered this same specimen of the short-tailed albatross among the mounted birds in the collection of John Y. Collins. With the rest of that collection, it was passed along a few years later to the Normal School, and it is there among the natural history exhibits of the College of Education today. And we'll come back to that.
Wow. Okay, we're going to come back to it. But by the late 1880s, John Collins had gone into real estate, like many people had, and was partnered with William Powell in the firm Collins and Powell. Their office was in the so-called Bank Block in the Old Town at C Street and Holly. This was the first place that he displayed his collections. Ooh, all right, so we got some cool photographs, which we will have shared.
And so I think John Collins is that guy in the chair there on the left doing something.
He's doing the works.
But you can see all the mounts up on his
oh my god
shelves and things.
Massive, like,
some
mountain
lions, deer, bird.
That is a really cool picture. So anyway, then John Collins built a house and a museum on some land in what was called Kieslingville, which is now what we know as the Columbia neighborhood. News articles describing the Collins place said, one of the neatest and prettiest painted residences on the bay. It is owned by John Y. Collins in Kieslingville, with all its nooks, crooks, and corners filled with a gentleman's collection of stuffed birds and animals. It will make a most interesting place to visit. Collins is a jolly old fellow that tries to enjoy this life and says he wants to pass in his checks in good style and say he has enjoyed some of the sweets of this life anyhow. In 1894, the newspaper quotes, John Y. Collins, the naturalist and curio collector, is 60 years old today, and he is giving the public a treat by opening free to all for 3 days his splendid museum at the west end of Front Street. It is an exceptionally fine collection of fossils, shells, marine curiosities, stuffed animals, birds and fishes, alligators, seals, and innumerable curiosities of all lands and climes. It is Mr. Collins' third collection, his 2 previous ones having been sold.
So this guy collected so much stuff he had sold collections off previously.
This is a third one. That's crazy. And there's so much in it.
Right?
Wow. In 1895, the Bellingham Bay Blade remarked on Collins' contributions to the county fair, which was a large sea lion measuring 7 feet in length and 4½ feet wide from point to point of flippers, recently captured in Rosario Straits and mounted by Professor Collins, as well as a 2-headed kitten. The paper said, quote, the freak is now being mounted by Professor Collins, and Mr. Greer will have it on exhibition at the fair. In 1897, it was reported Collins was stuffing and mounting a 7-foot-long mountain lion, over 10 feet counting the tail, that had been killed near Mount Baker to be displayed in J. Austin's store. He was busy.
Yeah, he was.
Can you imagine, like the sea lion?
Yeah.
That's some work.
Yeah, I don't even want to know what he did with the insides
and how do
of
you
that animal.
Oh, there's a lot of candles, soap made, but like to just get it there. Oh well, I guess they probably skinned him. Maybe.
Who knows?
I'm so fascinated by this. And he was just all over here in the Columbia neighborhood.
Yeah.
Do we know where his place was?
Yeah, it's by Lafayette. You know the Bolster House, which is the brick one right by the creek. It's like...
Is the purple one?
It's like a block over from that. It's not there.
Oh.
There's like a 1930s house on the site now. So his little house, and I can put this in our show notes, but
by the creek.
It's depicted on the Sanborn Fire Insurance map from the day, and it actually labels the little museum. There's like a little side building.
Oh, that's so
labeled
cool.
on it. Yeah.
So it was kind of up there in the neighborhood. Yeah, cool.
So let's see what's going on with Professor Collins. And I love back in this day, they call like anybody who seems vaguely like they might be smart professor.
Yeah, I kind of like that.
It's very wild. Like musicians all seem to be professor so-and-so. I'm like, none of these people actually have a college degree. But
even the doctors around here, I think you call him doctor. And
it was a sort of an honor.
Yeah.
I think. So anyway.
Well, I don't know. He earned it in my book.
Yeah. I mean, it's
professor it is.
The nutty professor. But around this time, John Collins, he's getting older in years and he's getting a little more perhaps senile. Because in 1901, they reported he was committed to the insane asylum at Steilacoom. So he did die at the asylum 2 years later, and then the Evening Herald reported the sad intelligence of the death of John Y. Collins, a well-known pioneer of Whatcom, has been received. And it says, he was born, blah, blah, blah. They talk about his whole life. They're really like, he was a stand-up guy.
Damn.
And they say he built and stocked the Collins Museum, located at the end of Eldridge Avenue. The museum contained one of the finest collections of curios on the coast and is now a valuable addition at the State Normal. Says, Mr. Collins was a lover of nature, and nothing appealed to him so strong as the birds, animals, and shells of the sea. He loved to talk of the beauties of the handiwork of nature. He began to study in this particular line when a mere boy, and the grand collection now in the normal school represents his life's work. In 1896, his mind began to fail, and later he was taken to the asylum where he died on January 30th. Interment was made in the asylum cemetery.
Oh.
So he is number 617 in the cemetery at Steilacoom and has a recently placed marker because since the early 2000s, a group called Grave Concerns was formed and asylum is long gone, but there's this big overgrown lot where the cemetery is. It was just, brambles. And so they cleared the lot and have identified and provided grave markers to over 2,000 people buried there.
Yeah.
Including our friend John Collins.
Oh, thanks, guys. That's amazing.
So we're going to come back to Collins and his collections and their fate in a minute, but we wanted to mention some other people who were doing taxidermy along the way here in and around here.
It wasn't just him. Okay, so one of those was Nathan Locke Davis. Davis was likely familiar with Collins' collections at the normal school as he worked as a taxidermist and collector for them. Davis was born in Brockport, New York in 1871, and he died in Pasadena, California in 1945. His death made the news with a headline that referred to him as a, quote, famous taxidermist. So there you go. He's also a professor. From the newspaper, quote, noted as one of the country's leading collectors of North American wild animals. For years, he collected animals in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and other wilderness areas of the United States for William T. Hornaday, director of the New York Zoological Park. Many of the specimens shown at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893 were Mr. Davis's work. Two of his best-known collections of animals mounted in their native habitat are now at the Smithsonian Institution, Washington, D.C. Mr. Davis became interested in taxidermy and bringing them back alive when he was still a youth. That's going to be my new motto. Bring them back alive. Davis has ended up in the P&W in Seattle around 1900 and lived in Bellingham from around 1909 through the 1920s. He opened a taxidermy shop on Prospect near where the post office is today. In 1909, a paper reported that he had won a gold medal for his, quote, rugs, birds, heads, and poultry. I mean, that's getting down to the brass tacks of things. That he contributed to the Whatcom County booth at the Alaskan Yukon exhibition. In 1913, he got a mention in the article describing the dedication of the new Elks Temple on Dock Street.
Beauty school.
The beauty school! You guys! If you ever visited Ren in her early days as a hairstylist, you've been into that beautiful building right next to
the Bellingham Bar and
terrible.
Grill.
The Bellingham Bar and Grill and Pure Bliss.
Just completely blanked.
We're
both of us.
terrible Bellinghamsters.
We'll cut that.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, very, very cool building. And yeah, that was the original Elks Temple. So there's a little description here saying, entering the spacious lobby, the first thing that attracts attention is the magnificent antlered buck, which faces the door as though guarding the precincts of the order to which it was lent its name. This animal, one of the most magnificent specimens of elk to be seen. It was stuffed and mounted by Nathan L. Davis, a local taxidermist. On top of each prong of its spreading antlers is located a small electric bulb in purple or white, which serves to assist in the illumination of the lobby and add to a most effective touch to the surroundings. Why is it gone and where can we find it?
I don't know. I've loved that. They're like
purple and white.
Put light bulbs on the antlers.
Let's make it gay. Let's taxidermy and make it queer.
It's great.
It's amazing. If more of those like big trophy heads were like that, I'd be way more chill. Oh yeah, he's got some ads in the paper indicate that he paid the highest prices for furs, and he sold, quote, fur trimming for ladies' dresses cut from full skins. How romantic.
So speaking of furs, there were a lot of furriers in Bellingham over the years, and this was obviously a very closely related profession.
Yeah.
A lot of people did both.
Right.
So some specialized more in furs and the fashion side of things because that was probably a little more profitable.
Super lucrative.
The 20s and 30s, the Fries Hide and Fur Company run by August Fries. So these folks were curing hides but also rendering. So they're making tallow and processing fats. And I guess they were allowed to do this because they did this right on Bay Street.
Oh.
Basically, you know where we went to the escape room?
Mm-hmm.
Right there where they were.
So down by the water.
Yep.
Maybe that's why
But they were complaining, the Leopold Hotel was complaining about the smell. So, yeah, they were complaining about ashes noticeable on breezy days and odors from the plant.
That's a bummer when you're trying to attract some guests. Okay.
Interestingly, Googling about, the Fries Hide and Tallow Company still exists. It's still a business. It's in Ferndale. Anyway, so, yeah.
Cool.
You also had the Northwestern Fur Company run by Slovakian John Sleninka, who operated for many years in the Herald building. And I love his ads because they had a cute little drawing of this little furry critter with like a human face. face.
Oh, no.
It's very creepy.
Of course you would like
that. I'll put it in the I love it. I'm like, I want a tattoo of that little guy.
Oh, my God. Okay.
And then you had the Neal Fur Company, run by Walter Neal, who I did a whole blog post on after former guide Jane had found a fur coat with his tag in it at Rag Finery. So you can sometimes find old fur coats, in thrift stores and around in grandma's attics and stuff. And I always check for tags because a lot of these people hand sewn their own little tags in there. And I've seen both Neal Fur and the Northwestern Fur Company.
Nice.
So, but Neal specifically advertised taxidermy services also, along with the manufacture, repair, care, and sale and storage of fur coats and garments.
Okay, weird to think about. Perhaps an undertaker would also be someone who might dabble in taxidermy, which is, yes, a little
Weird
creepy. Some of you may recall Undertaker Molesby from our downtown Gore and Lore tours. Albert Molesby's parlors were in the Oakland building in the corner space, now home to the awesome and iconic Old Town Cafe. We found an article from 1905 titled, "Specimen is not mounted. Taxidermist finds task too great for him. Undertaker Molesby also falls victim to practical joker, presented with specimen of genus Mephitis, known by more common name." Okay, so apparently, I do remember this story. Apparently somebody playing a practical joke had telephoned Molesby and asked him if he ever did work in taxidermy, which he answered in the affirmative. The caller told Molesby he would leave a fine specimen in his office that he would like to have mounted. Molesby hastened down after breakfast and was, quote, met by a very foul odor. He immediately opened all doors and windows and then discovered the smell coming from a gunny sack, which contained, according to the reporter, a large black-striped creature, one of several species of American muskline carnivores of the genus Mephitis, or, as Molesby called it, simply a common, everyday skunk. Apparently, Molesby placed the critter in a vat containing a strong solution of formaldehyde, muric acid, and other properties of like nature. That's a quote. That's fucking crazy. We have no follow-up on the story, but we just had to include it.
Okay.
Good one, Colby. I love that story.
Yes.
It's just a common everyday skunk.
Okay. So now we're going to go back to John Edson. Remember, we mentioned him before. He had written the little newspaper article about John Collins and how he had met him in the 1880s, and this inspired him. So John M. Edson was an amateur ornithologist and taxidermist who in the late 1930s helped organize and create the Whatcom Museum.
Yay!
In Old City Hall, which they were trying to tear down at the time because they built the new City Hall. And he was a big organizer in like, let's use this building, let's make it a museum. And a big part of the original collection was his birds, which you can go see today.
They're still there.
In the Edson
They're back.
collection. And he also wrote regular columns in the Herald about the museum collections over the years, which are pretty fun to read through. And so in an article from 1939, Edson told how Bellingham Museum idea dates from territorial days. I'll read you a little bit of it here. So it says, quote, "Even in the long ago territorial days, there was a well-known and interesting museum in Whatcom. It was a one-man enterprise, its director and proprietor being a certain esteemed citizen of the pioneer period. The writer had made his acquaintance before the statehood era. A story could be written about him and his hobby." So he's recollecting meeting our guy John Collins in 1888.
Yes.
And he says, on a warm midday in August 1888, the old red Sidewheeler, Idaho, completing her 24-hour cruise from Seattle, tied up at the distal end of the Colony Wharf, Whatcom. The little crowd of tenderfoot passengers heaved sighs of relief as they gathered up their bags and filed down the gangplank. They were wearied with watching the leaping salmon, the teeming waterfowl, the seals and sea lions. The scenery had been much obscured by a pall of acrid smoke from clearing fires. The pioneers had to burn off the heavy timber for their prospective garden spots. They couldn't wait for the lumbermen to come and take it. I just love that little description of his arrival in Bellingham Bay.
Lovely.
So he says, "It was a sweltering and tedious hike over the rough planks of that long, long wharf. The only vehicle was a freight wagon. Beneath was a wide, shimmering mud flat of little interest, but a distant cluster of small buildings on shore suggested some possibilities. There might be restaurants and hotels among them. As for the first, they were a myth, for there wasn't a restaurant in 100 miles. Saloons there were, 4 of them.
Ooh.
But for hotels, there was the Pacific House or the Terminus Hotel, where one could eat with loggers and fishermen for 25 cents. The Whatcom House charged 50, and one would have the society of sightseers, real estate, and professional men. Women were rather scarce in public places. I know, I just had to include all that, even though it's kind of an aside because it's such a nice little description. So he says, among the motley troop of newcomers on that occasion was the writer hereof. He arrived for the purpose of taking over management of one of the 2 local newspapers. In those days, an editor functioning as a reporter and business manager in a little town of the far frontier came quickly in touch with all the activities and all the population. About every citizen was a character in his way, from Mayor Jenkins to Oscar the printer's devil. But one of the first to intrigue the writer was good-natured, red-whiskered John Y. Collins.
Woo woo.
It was quickly discovered that there was a community of interest and fellow feeling between the 2, where youth and age could meet on common ground.
Oh, keep going. I love it.
Okay.
More.
Ostensibly, Mr. Collins was a real estate dealer, but more really, he was a devotee of the museum hobby. 7 years earlier, he had come from Kansas as secretary of the Washington colony. For a score of years, he had diligently accumulated curios, natural history specimens, geological, Indian, and miscellaneous items to no end. He had built a store building to house this pioneer museum near the west end of Front Street, now Eldridge Avenue. Here, the writer spent hours with Mr. Collins, noting down data concerning the more interesting specimens. Where and how did he get the albatross, the petrel, the harlequin duck, the hawk owl? His answers were explicit, and he had a story for the white deer, cougar, sea lion, and so on. He was not a scientist and unfortunately neglected to properly label his specimens. However, his docent service was very satisfactory to the average visitor. Back in 1899, the people appreciated the value of visual education, and as preparations were on the way for the first opening of the Bellingham Normal School, the Collins Museum was acquired and presented as an appealing feature to the new institution. Yeah, so that's pretty cool.
Wow, very cool.
And Edson also worked as a registrar at the normal school.
Oh, okay.
Until his retirement, and then he devoted a lot of time to taxidermy. All his little birdies and things.
Okay. Wow. So then in 1939, when the new city hall was built on Lottie Street, the fate of the old red building on Prospect was up in the air, with demolition being a popular suggestion. That's insane to me. Mm-hmm. John Edson lobbied for the building to be saved and used as a museum. Without him, we might not have our museum building, our iconic building.
I know. Like literally. The Bellingham building.
Yeah. Edson contributed hundreds of his mounted birds and some small mammals to the museum. Today, the John M. Edson Hall of Birds serves as an important educational tool. They are all up now in the main building, right?
Yeah, they're up on that balcony overlooking
I remember they used to be in the Siree.
Yeah, you're right. They've moved them like several times.
Yeah. I love that they're now up
now they're back up in the main
building. Yeah, it's pretty cool. The museum has kept the birds, as many of them are local species, because of the historical relevance and significance of Edson himself. However, over the years, the museum has refined its scope, what it collects and why, as we've talked about earlier. This, and also the fire of 1961, means that some of the weird things we've come across as mentioned as part of the museum's collection in these old newspapers are no longer there, so we probably lost some of it, sadly.
But also, yeah, it's like, as a museum, you have to decide. You can't just amass and amass and amass. You have limited storage.
Yeah.
And I think over time, the focus has become more on what's really relevant. Local history.
So the birds that are up there now are local.
Well, yeah. And I
specimens.
mean, they're considered relevant too because of his importance.
Sure.
So.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they have a cool little diorama kind of thing of his desk and stuff. It's
I mean, for
rad.
Everything you see displayed in a museum, there's a gajillion more that are, just kept stored because you can't display everything all the time.
Yeah. In the beginning, the collections were pretty willy-nilly, as we talked about. An article from 1956 described the, quote, animal room and its exhibits in the museum. They said the collections of J.M. Edson and E.J. Booth comprise most of the small animals of the Mount Baker region. A large case of Arctic animal skulls is part of the extensive Alaskan collection, as is also the leg bone of a prehistoric Arctic mammoth and half of a walrus hide. Cool. Animal room. Cool. And then, in a case especially made for it, is the alligator, which came to Bellingham in a carnival show during one of the Blossom Time festivals. This alligator belonged to the snake charmer and was from Florida. No one knows quite what happened, but the alligator got sick and died. And the snake charmer, looking beautiful and exotic, as all snake charmers do, of course, walked right over to the museum and said, "Do you want an alligator?" And the museum decided that it would love to have an alligator. It was mounted by Carl Akers in his taxidermy shop and is now one of the attractions of the animal room. Unquote. You want an alligator? So Colby checked, and the museum does not have the alligator anymore, which is so sad. But this brings us to our last historic taxidermist of the day, and that is Carl Akers.
So Akers Taxidermy, I well remember it. Probably some locals who have lived here more than a couple of decades under your belts might also remember Akers. Carl Akers was born in 1924 in West Virginia, and he became interested in taxidermy as a teenager. So as a young man, he joined the military, served in World War II, and he ended up with the Coast Artillery in Seattle area. So after getting out of military, he stayed in the Pacific Northwest, and he completed a 3-year apprenticeship with the Jonas Brothers Taxidermy.
I wish I could remember a Jonas Brothers song at this moment.
I just picture the Jonas Brothers doing taxidermy, and it's really funny. But these Jonas Brothers were a big deal in the world of taxidermy
cool.
at the time. So then Carl started thinking about starting his own business. He got married to his wife, whose name was Audrey, but she went by Nikki. They moved to Bellingham, and thinking, hunting and fishing grounds around this area would make a good place for a taxidermy business. And their 3 children were all born here, including son Ralph, who also learned the trade. So Akers said he had a hard time picking up clientele at first, and it took him about 10 years to really make a profitable business to support his family, working 10-hour days, 6 days a week, that kind of a thing. His wife, Nikki, helped sewing, backing on bear rugs and keeping the books, and it was a real family business.
Family affair.
Yep. And they were first located in a building on Holly Street in Old Town, and then in 1955, he bought the Territorial Courthouse building on East Street, our oldest brick building, and there's pictures of the building with the Akers Taxidermy sign on it. I don't remember when it was there, but it was there for a long time, and he was really interested in history, and he later donated the building to the Historical Society in 1979, and it's now again in private ownership and is home to the Logie Museum today. And after moving out of there, they moved up to another cool historical building, which was the old Emmanuel School of Industries building on Astor and I Streets. But it was a real bright red, and it had big, huge letters that said Akers Taxidermy on the side for years. And I have a story.
Oh, yeah.
About going there.
Story.
So I was taking a class, I think at the community college on I don't remember, world music or something. And one of the projects for the class was you had to somehow make a homemade instrument for extra credit or something. And so I had this idea.
Of course.
Because at the time I was kind of a hippie girl. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a drum. I was really going to do a real drum. I didn't want to make no fakey fake thing.
Yeah.
So I was researching it.
Anthropology.
I was really going
role.
in. And so I'm like, gotta get some goat skin to make this drum out of.
As one does.
And so I figure out, okay, I gotta go to Akers Taxidermy. So I went there, and I went in the building. I looked at their pictures to see, so it's not any of the Akers. It must have been somebody who worked for them. But he looked like a big biker dude. Bearded and and not a man of many words. So what do you want? Kind of thing. And I'm like, I'm here to buy a goat skin to make a drum, This little...
And you're crocheted halter top. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so he just turns around and starts walking, and I'm like, well, I guess I'm supposed to follow him. So I just am following this man into this building, and it's kind of dark and smelly. Yeah, and there's taxidermy things everywhere, and he's like leading me up staircases and down hallways, and I'm like, I'm gonna die. I am gonna get murdered. I thought it was sketchy. It was old and dank and creepy and smelled like death, and I was, oh my God.
Red flags all around you.
Just be taxidermied. My skin is gonna be.
It's where they keep the human girls.
Yeah, and then he like picks up a bucket and like picks up this dripping wet skin and slaps it down. And I'm just like, okay, how much is it? It was so intimidating.
Totally cool. Like, playing it off.
Trying to be like cool, but just panicking. And I forget what I paid him for it. And just like he threw it in like a grocery sack. And I just
I'll gotta give you a bag.
What?
Jesus Christ.
Smelly skin. I did make the draw, but it didn't turn out very good.
Well, I can't imagine.
Ugh.
Did you pass? Did you get a good grade?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
I would hope so. You almost got stuffed.
I know, that man. He scared me shitless.
Holy shit.
I bet he had a laugh about it. But...
Only in the 90s could you get away with that shit, right?
Oh, God. So, anyway, over the years, quite a number of articles have been written about Akers, and he was interviewed many times, Carl was, before he passed away. So here's a quote that kind of backs up my story. So it says, Akers Taxidermy, tucked away in an old red school building on Astor Street, may be the quietest natural history adventure in Whatcom County. As you step into the building, the pungent stench of curing animal hides assaults you.
Oh, God. What an adventure.
I know. It really was. But look around and you'll forget about the smell. Lifelike grizzly bears, moose, elk, mountain goats, bighorn sheep, and wolves take you off guard.
Oh, my God.
Small creatures such as geese, ducks, and pheasants are riveting in their own right.
Sure.
Turn around and you'll spy a stuffed chimpanzee hanging on a branch, or a buffalo head that once belonged to members of Wild Bill Hickok's family.
That sounds terrifying, honestly.
But right? So they did eventually build up a nationwide clientele, and they could turn out 30 to 40 mounts per month.
Dang.
Thousands of examples of the Akers works are scattered around the world. And he said in the 60s, he started getting more and more requests to repair ceremonial drums for the Lummi Nation, which led to more and more work manufacturing drums for tribes in the Pacific Northwest.
Neat. So you were in the right place.
I knew.
A couple decades late, but you had the right idea. That's hilarious. Okay, interesting. Akers told some good stories about various interesting jobs. San Juan Historical Society commissioned a huge pig to represent the only victim of the San Juan Island Pig War of 1859. It's on display at the museum in Friday Harbor. The 800-pound pig was completed in 4 weeks. A real rush job, quote unquote, that normally would have taken 3 months.
I know. And if you want to learn about the pig war,
yes.
I just heard a great 2-part episodes from What the Washington, which is local folks who we met who are really sweet, and
very
check
cool
out that
folks.
podcast.
It is
the pig.
I need to take a little
field trip.
Okay. Quote, the biggest critter I ever worked on was an enormous polar bear, 11 feet long, that weighed close to a ton. Damn. Okay, so the pig was nothing. Most common were bear and deer. Not all of the animals came from hunters and fishers. Some were from zoos or had died of old age. He had requests to stuff pets, but said he tried to avoid those jobs. He said, quote, people are just too close to their pets. We can't get their personality. That is true. Okay. Another tick in the column.
Can you imagine if you've taxidermied someone's pet and then you're like, here's Fluffy,
and
they're like, I don't look like Fluffy.
That ain't it. That ain't it.
You're like,
no, I can 100% understand. Yeah. He also said, quote, we get calls each week for animals we can't legally mount. You can't mount songbirds, birds of prey, or migratory waterfowl for sale. Cougars are now illegal to mount, unquote. One article described him having accumulated a freezer full of animals he hadn't had time to mount, including a bison head and a white wolf. Jesus Christ. Those are legal?
It's a big freezer.
It's a massive freezer.
A bison head?
That's a walk-in. Holy moly. Akers apprenticed dozens of folks wanting to learn the trade. He was quoted as saying, "It is not a well-paying field because it is an art." Ain't that the truth? They moved out of the Astor Street building circa 2000. A 2001 article listed the building potentially haunted Bellingham locales. They interviewed Ralph Akers, who said, quote, "Paranormal activity was scarce." He did say that once when they were broken into, the police came with their dog, which pissed itself and ran out of the building. Scared of being stuffed. Yeah, probably scared of being stuffed.
Imagine the smells in there. The
such
dog
awful
is
smells.
Just like a million animals died here.
Animals?
Abort.
Yeah, exactly. I'm next. It was just like how you felt.
Yes, I know. I'm still like, see? They're like, oh, that place has to be haunted. It's so creepy.
No, yeah. It did get a fancy renovation in the early aughts and is now beautiful, expensive condos and yoga studios and such. So Carl Akers passed away in 2015. Son Ralph has focused on making drums, Colby, and you can find him at akersdrums.com.
Makes way better drums than I do. I could say that.
Let's guarantee that. Go hit up Akers Drums. And also, I love that just came full fucking circle.
Yeah, and so all of this got me thinking about what happened to the John Collins collection up at the normal school. And I remember when, and in the early days before Haggard Hall now it's connected to the library. It's part of the library, but it used to be the science building. And I remember walking around on campus and you could walk by the building and there were windows, basement windows, and all the taxidermied animals were in the windows and we would go look at them.
Foot level as you're walking by. Yeah.
And we like, because it was creepy.
It's pretty cool.
And there's some in the Smate building now. And they have a little resource center in there. It's like a little mini library. And there's birds and things on the shelves in there. And so I contacted the special collections, the archivist up at Western, and was like, I am researching and looking for anything about the John Collins collection and hoping that there might be some kind of official inventory. It sounds like they may have been kind of scattered around throughout Western and not really kept track of over the years. So unclear.
Sadly.
But I'm going to go visit before this airs. I'm going to go up to Smate and take a few pictures and things. So I'll put the in show note. Western didn't really have a lot of information, but they did send this picture. There.
Yeah, this is really cool.
Which is from the 1902 normal school catalog. And it says, view of the museum. And it has these big glass cabinet case shelf things.
Yeah.
Filled with birds. Stuffed birds, it looks like, and then on top there's a bunch of other
some
critters.
mammal kind of vibes.
And those are some kind of janky.
They are janky looking. Down on the floor though,
there's the alligator.
We got an alligator. And one. Those are some really cool cases too, though. This picture is neat.
Beautiful.
Yeah, gorgeous.
And that at the time would have been in Old Main because that was the building.
Yeah, one building.
So all
the main building.
All the college classes and courses and things were all in that one building.
Yeah.
And,
those deers up there are real suspect.
Just
they got a weird frame on them.
They don't look super true to life, natural.
Got some real long necks.
Yeah.
Some real lumpy bodies.
Yeah.
But we'll share that.
Okay, so modern trans taxidermy's kind of made a comeback, and you have so-called rogue taxidermy, which was kind of coined in the early 2000s by a Minnesota art collective of rogue taxidermists.
Right.
And so it's essentially mixed media sculpture, and it can be kind of unorthodox, like splicing together of different species. Like, we're not going for a scientific kind of thing here. It's more arty and abstract and whatever. Hipsters. Also, there's new methods of preserving animals, like freeze drying, which is kind of more like mummification and less like taxidermy. So...
Whoa. Wow, Colby, as usual, amazing research. I am delighted and excited.
Are you ready to learn some taxidermy?
I'm ready to learn some taxidermy. And I have also decided I'm going to let everybody know, and I'm not going to get Cecil stuffed. Yeah. And he's got a long time to live. But now, I have all the information, and I've decided.
Freeze drying might be the way to go.
I know, we'll see. I'm not going to clone him. I'm not rich. Maybe by then I'll have enough money to
I have seen like some of the newbie taxidermy people do pets. Like it is a thing you can do.
Send him to some weirdo on Etsy and see what comes back.
Oh, God.
You never know.
Yes.
Talk me down if it comes to that.
No, but we are. I'm not going to learn. I'm not going to the workshop, but we're sending Sarah.
Yes.
Sarah.
She's going to go. So yeah.
Some taxidermy,
Don't forget. Yeah, we got the museum is going to host 2 events featuring Alice Markham and Paloma Strong of Prey Taxidermy. They are purveyors of museum taxidermy for education and conservation and offering taxidermy classes utilizing museum techniques. We're so stoked. They got them up here to do a couple little things. Friday, May 30th from 6:30 to 9. The Whatcom Museum is hosting a viewing of Stuffed, a documentary about the art of taxidermy, followed by a Q&A with Alice and Paloma. And then, here we go. So, Saturday, June 1st, 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., Taxidermy Lab with Alice Markham and Paloma Strong. This is really exciting shit. The demonstration course is going to provide students with an on-site tutorial into the world of museum taxidermy. An excellent opportunity if you have ever wanted to learn taxidermy but didn't know where to start, or if you're exploring taxidermy and have questions.
And maybe after listening to this, you'll just be ready to
dive
in.
Get in there. You never know what kind of animal you're going to find and need to preserve for future generations.
Be careful because some are illegal.
Do a real good internet search. But Sarah will hopefully have lots to tell us. We're very excited.
Yeah, and also this weekend when this comes out, it will be immediately before tomorrow, Friday, May 17th. Our sea shanty sing-along. Come on down, El Capitan's on Cornwall, and sing some salty songs with us. Saturday, we have a new maritime-themed tour happening in downtown Bellingham called Shore Leave. That's our salty history tour. And there'll be a couple more of those offered over the summer. Bookable at bellinghistory.com.
Yeah, don't miss out on that one. That's a limited special release
special
with Andra. We're stoked.
And a little Sailor Andra. And then on Sunday, May 19th, we'll be at the celebration of the schooner Zodiac for celebrating 100 years at sail of that 160-foot wooden ship that calls Bellingham her home port these days. So we're going to be at the Bellingham Cruise Terminal at the foot of Harris Avenue. There'll be an open house all day. You can go down there and tour the boat, check it out, and join the party, and we'll be there hanging out. You can book a tour on the Zodiac, so check that out. That's a really great activity here in Bellingham.
Yeah, really cool. Okay, well, that was a doozy, and I loved every minute of it, Colby. That wraps up today's Belling History. We hope you enjoyed it, and with that, we're going to say goodbye for now. Until next time, don't forget, we'll be back every third Thursday this season with new episodes.
Well, hey there, mama, where'd you go? You gotta reap just what you sow. That's too bad, too bad. To that old time, the old man hits without bad weather. Put on the side, they were sold together. That's too bad, to listen to that old time.
Thank you all for listening to Belling History with the Good Time Girls. You can check out our show notes at bellinghistory.com. Follow us on all the social medias. If you find yourself in Bellingham, check out our Belling History tours. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe and review on your favorite podcast platforms.
Oh, blue, 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 blue. Most of the time, blue is so blue. That's too bad. To listen to that old time music. I lost my hat, I lost my brim. I look like crows just swinging on a limb. That's too bad. To listen to that old time music.
All right, and as usual, we'd like to thank Devin Champlin and the late great Lucas Hicks for the use of the Gallus Brothers song Too Bad West Coast Blues. You can find the Gallus Brothers and Devin Champlin tunes on Bandcamp, and you can also find Devin Champlin at Champlin Guitars in Bellingham.
Lost my hat, lost my brim, looking like a crow's nest swinging from a limb. That's too bad, too bad. Well, I got no bugging, I got no smokes. I look like Grandpap and all of his folks. That's too bad to listen to that old time music.
Tune in next time for more Belling History.
Thank you. Thanks.